welcome to another session of Neighbors and Friends. We're starting the new year, 2010, and we have with us today a guest who is beyond neighbors and friends. Today we have family. Hello, Louis. We have Louis de Grazia.
Glad to be here.
And I have known Louis here at the center because he teaches courses here. And some of the courses have been on diversity, racial diversity, gender, age, and gender orientation. And we'll let you tell our listeners, Louis, about your interest in those topics.
In those topics.
Well, or the one specifically.
We could talk about the courses that I teach, but my interest in diversity and tolerance started with Diane Day, as you remember, and we co-taught
Yes.
Those courses, thinking that there simply are issues where there are strong feelings on two sides, and both sides really need to be heard before one's own point of view makes sense. So much so that sometimes one really needs to hear another side before one is even clear about what one believes themselves, himself or herself. But I think the notion of diversity maybe has to do with my own experience with my son. My son is gay. He is a beautiful man, a beautiful person, and has been a gift, an absolute gift from the day he was born. And I knew that my son was gay when he was 4 years old. And people always ask me, well, how in the world could you know something like that at 4 years old? And I knew because, well, I'll get into a second reason, but the first reason was he and my daughter, who is 2 years older and who is an opera singer, were very, very close. And they would be with each other all the time, and she would come up against something and make a mess of it immediately. And he would look at it silently and either walk around it or suggest something, and she would go out of her mind so angry that he could resolve an issue so easily when she made a mess of it. And I asked myself, even then, where does this come from? Where does this kind of beautiful sense of life, even at 4 years old, where did that come from? And I was teaching courses in human sexuality at Nebraska Wesleyan, where I was a professor. And we had gay people, homosexuals and lesbians in our classes all the time. And that's an issue we would talk about. That is, how did you know and when? And they would all say the same thing, pretty much that whenever as soon as they knew they were conscious of anything at all, and it was usually around 4 years old, that they had some consciousness, they knew they were different.
That's right.
They had no idea what that meant. They had no name for it.
Right.
They would look at girls. Girls would look at girls and say, I'm not like that. And they would look at boys and say, I'm not like that. And boys would do the same thing. They knew they were not on the same track as developing kids were. They didn't know what it was. And in virtually every case, virtually every case, there was some kind of aesthetic gift, whether it was music or dance or art. In some way, they were aesthetically gifted, virtually every one. And my son was incredibly gifted in art already. He would fly around the house in this beautiful cape, that's some sequined cape, and he would talk about he couldn't say the word magic, but it was his magic cape. He would say, my magic cape, and he would fly around the house in that thing. My other son, who was the oldest in the family, would be embarrassed by it, but I looked at him and said, where in the world does this incredibly beautiful child, not only to look at, but in his sense of life, where does that come from? And I said, oh, I think I know. And I told my wife, and I simply said to her, don't be surprised if this is the case. And frankly, I was, can I use the word? Yeah, I think I was pleased. I felt I had been given a gift, that I had been honored to have such a child. And that's been the case ever since.
That's interesting. In my own case, it's true as well, Louis, that long before I knew the words to describe my difference, I knew I was different. But,
yeah, that's interesting to me in the first place, that one is aware of that kind of difference, gender difference at such a young age. Of course, there's no word for it. My son didn't have a word for it until he was in college. Well, he knew about it, obviously, but didn't know about it for himself until later. I remember kind of an amusing story, because he would carry on, I guess they would be love affairs, with girls, but they were mainly in writing, and they would write beautiful things to each other, and he, being so gifted in art, would illustrate the letters he wrote. And I couldn't believe it. They were just beautiful things. And there was one woman in Ohio who was the daughter of a friend of mine, and she was Korean, and she was adopted, and she was crazy about my son. His name is Shandor, but we call him Sonny. Shandor is a Hungarian name. My wife, who is deceased now 18 years, was Hungarian, and we wanted a Hungarian name, and so he's Shandor.
And I tell the audience, an extremely beautiful woman. You shared a picture with us one time. Yes.
I've been very fortunate. That anyway, Sonny was carried on this correspondence with this high school girl in Ohio, and she told her mother, who was a very close friend of mine, that she had one request only for her graduation from high school gift, and that is to come to Nebraska, where we were living, to see Sonny. And her mother said, okay, and so they came to Nebraska to see Sonny, and they carried on this torrid romance in letters. And when she came, he had no time for her at all. And she was absolutely devastated and had no idea why. And of course, it was clear why.
Right.
But he couldn't even say it then. And I remember another, girls are crazy about Sonny. And I think the reason is that in the first place, he's such a beautiful person to look at, and he spends a lot of time in the gym, and so has a beautiful body as well. But it was because he had no agenda. He was just there to appreciate the person and enjoy the person without an agenda, and girls really loved that about him.
Right. I find it rare to have a young man who is not physically demanding.
Yes.
But they, of course, they can't figure out why he's not.
But just to be with. But we were also at a graduation at Annapolis. A nephew of mine was graduating from Annapolis in the Navy, and Sonny was there also. And I thought, that these macho guys, these Navy officers, would maybe be a little bit negative toward Sonny or shy away from him, but not at all. Sonny was the center of attention in groups of men or women. And I don't think that has anything to do with his being gay. But I guess I do seem to think that there are special gifts that accrue to one, and I know it's true about him.
The Native Americans call LGBT people two-spirited, and they say to me that indicates that in their native sense, before they were Christianized, they considered, they raised their gay children to be medicine men, medicine women, chiefs of various kinds, and they figured that person had double insight, which is something like the gift that you're talking about.
I like that. I like that, two-spirited, and it's really true about Sonny, for sure, that he excelled both in aesthetic areas, art, music, dance, and he didn't have any training in those things, I must admit, it bothered me sometimes. Where does that come from? And he doesn't have any training for it. My daughter and he are very, very, very close. But she had training in dance, and he didn't. And the teacher said, well, maybe we should have him in a class or two. And he went to this class, and he was immediately incredible. Just immediately. And my daughter was so angry again. That how could he do this? But I like the notion of two-spirited, because I can certainly see that in Sonny.
Right.
Yeah. But I think the main thing for me is that he has been and the word to me that just keeps coming is gift. He's been a gift to me, to our family, and to everyone he's around. And I can't, I really feel blessed,
Right.
To have had such a child.
So he's a gift to you, and he's a gifted person.
Yeah, in both senses.
You were...
the only thing my wife was worried about was the possible hostility that he might experience. And I've talked to him about that. Unfortunately, my wife died before he even came out. And that was kind of sad, because they were unbelievably close. In fact, my wife, after he was born and after a couple of years, said, I don't really want any more children, because it just can't get any better than this. And she meant that Sonny was a gift to her as well. But he, and I'm not sure how to say this, but he officially came out after she died. And he said to me, do you think she still would have loved me? And of course, that was not an issue for me at all. I knew that wasn't even a question, but it was for him. And their relationship has a double edge to it. I mean, it was so close and so beautiful that all of us, me and my other children, really appreciated just watching it. But it has another side to it also, and that is that Sonny, even now, I don't know how to put this, but there's a certain kind of sadness to his life, and it's because he's constantly aware of the fact that this most beautiful person, his mother, my wife, was taken so early, and he said at one point, if this kind of thing can happen in this life, I'm not sure it's worth it. Which is really sad, but it's sad because it was so beautiful. But he still feels that more than my other children, because my other children are married and they have children. He is not, and I think he feels it more than they do. They all do it in a way.
They feel a loss.
Yeah. But he feels it not just as a personal loss, but almost as a kind of there's a philosophical dimension to it. What kind of life is this that allows such a thing to happen? And I know that he feels that daily. Yeah.
That we all expect to lose our mothers at some point, but not so young.
Right.
And possibly because he had not had a chance to discuss himself with her.
Yes, I think so. I think that would have helped a lot.
Yeah.
That would have helped a lot. He knew that I had no problem with it, and of course he knew a lot of other young gay men who did have problems at home. I think primarily with fathers, and he knew that wasn't an issue with me at all. But he never talked about it with his mother, and so that was a lingering issue for him, I think.
An incompletion.
Yeah, I think so. Uh-huh.
Yeah. But you said you had suggested to your wife early on that you not to be surprised if he's gay.
Yeah. I suggested that to her when he was 4, but we never really talked about it again. And then he was at school in Lincoln, where we were, for a couple of years, and then transferred to the University of New Mexico, and that's when he really came out there, but had never really discussed it with her. And we never, we hinted at it with each other, but never looked at it in depth, and they never talked about it, which I think was too bad. Not only do I not think, I am sure that she would not have had a problem with that at all. He was, for her, he was the perfect child.
Just a delight.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's hope that people out there in the audience will take that as a lesson to not put it off too long. To go ahead and bring it up. Although I know certainly that there are parents still in the 21st century that have an issue with it.
I have a story that I'm going to relate, and I'm not going to mention any names, but I have a close friend who died this year, and I performed the funeral. He was married, had 3 children, and the marriage was not successful. The children were alienated from their mother, and in some ways from him, because he would not communicate. He would simply go in his room and read and listen to music and would not communicate. And they have no idea why that was the case. I know what was wrong. He's gay. Was never said, ever, in the family, neither to his children or to his wife, and it really ruined her life, the children's life, his life, because it could not be said. And I just think that is a modern tragedy.
Yes, yes.
And I'm not sure what should have happened, but certainly she should not have lived the life that she did, which was really a tragic life for her. And I can see it being played out in the children also, just because it could not be said. I think it's a modern tragedy.
Yes.
I mean, I suppose they should have got a divorce, I suppose. And I think it would have been better for both of them had that happened, and for the children. But certainly, it should have been said, and it never has been, hasn't yet, and probably never will be.
Well, that's one reason I make these series of interviews, and one reason that I always have a stack of literature. I have the feeling that too much of the condemnation of gay people and queer people, transgender people, comes from bad translations, bad interpretations of Scripture.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm going to be teaching a course. Well, it's a course I've taught before called Exegesis Saves. And the title is lost on most people. But I'm going to add some topics this time, and one of the topics is homosexuality and the Bible. And I think it will be very helpful to. I don't hear that discussed very often, and when it is, it's almost. It's passed off with one word: abomination, and that's it. And there's so much more going on there, and I hope to make that clear.
I personally think that when I read the Bible, I can see tons of men and women who are gay. I could name a few.
And of course, immediately comes to mind the phrase, the biblical phrase, and Jonathan loved David.
Right. And took off his armor and his robe.
Yeah.
And we know that there were no underpants in those days.
Yeah.
That was, and people say, oh no, David couldn't have been gay. Well, he couldn't marry Jonathan because he had to produce an heir.
Uh-huh.
And so he just went through women like mad.
He did.
But his real love was Jonathan.
Yeah.
And I think that Ruth and Naomi were a couple of lesbians. So that Jesus had a great-great-grandmother who was a lesbian. I think that some of his followers were lesbian couples and some gay couples.
Well, there's a lot of questions about Paul.
What was the thorn in his flesh?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And besides those verses that are quoted against a minority of God's creation, come from sections in the Bible where nobody follows the rest of those orders.
Right.
There has never been, as far as I know, on the steps of the courthouse, a stoning of a sassy child. And that is ordered in Scripture.
I think the point I try to make in this class, not only on this topic, but on all the topics, is that when one looks at Scripture, not in terms of what one has been taught or what one is supposed to believe, but when one looks at it objectively, and by objectively I mean to use the tools that scholars use, that any right-thinking person uses to look at any text. And that's what we mean by being objective. Surprising things come out. Mm-hmm. Things that one would say, oh, you mean I don't? You mean it doesn't say what I've been told all these years? It doesn't say what my Sunday school teacher told me, or even my church told me? Yeah. And I am not speaking against Sunday school or church at all, but what I'm saying is when we look at Scripture not from the point of view of what has been said, but letting the text tell you what it says, and not for you to inject your own prejudices in it, surprising things are found. Right. And that, I think that's exactly true with the issue of homosexuality as well, and so many others.
Well, Louis has been with us sharing information about his experience with a son who was gay, as seeing him as a gift. And I want the audience to know that Louis has been a pastor and a professor. And maybe you'd like to tell us that word exegesis, what that means?
Exegesis is, it's obviously a word play, of course, on the bumper stickers and the signs that say Jesus saves. And to say exegesis saves is a tongue-in-cheek expression, but I think it's a fabulous title, because all it says is that when one looks at any text, and I don't care what it is, if it's literature or science or the Bible, objectively, surprising things come out. Okay. And it seems to me that's the way we should look at any text, including the Bible. And my purpose in doing that is because there seems to be such a disjunction between what the Bible seems to say and what modern science seems to say. And what I'm saying is that when you do a proper exegetical job on the text, that disjunction does not exist. Okay. So the Bible is not a silly book.
No. But I want the audience to know that your class, you offer it both in the afternoon and in the evening. Mm-hmm. I have signed up for both, because in all the classes I've taken with Louis, the discussion is so interesting. So glad you came.
My pleasure.
So glad.
Thanks, Elsie.
Thank you.